The transport shuttle descended through Virani's upper atmosphere with mechanical precision that felt devoid of turbulence. Kyle pressed his palm against the viewport, watching the planet's surface resolve from abstract color into recognizable geography. Crystalline structures jutted from forested valleys like frozen music, catching triple sunlight in ways that hurt to observe directly. The briefing materials had described the Meridian Temple complex as culturally significant. The phrase felt inadequate watching those spires grow larger. 7 centuries of accumulated knowledge, preserved in living memory by beings whose entire civilization existed as layered sound. And now silent. Kyle's reflection stared back from the viewport, 32 years compressed into features that looked unremarkable by any species' aesthetic standards. Brown hair kept regulation short. Eyes the color of Earth's oceans. The debt forgiveness had been the deciding factor. Student loans, medical bills from his mother's final year, accumulated weight of choices made in his early 20s. The Confluence Integration Program offered a clean slate in exchange for 36 months of service. The shuttle touched down with barely a tremor. Kyle gathered his single permitted container and stepped through the airlock into Virani's atmosphere. Slightly denser than Earth standard, carrying scents his brain couldn't categorize. A single figure waited at the prescribed distance. Miraveth. Her scales caught the fading light, deep blue marked with silver patterns that denoted 7 centuries of accumulated wisdom. She didn't move as he approached, her throat sac pulsing once, visible beneath the translucent membrane of her neck, but no sound emerged. Kyle stopped at exactly 1.8 meters, as protocol demanded. Miraveth's eyes, larger than human, adapted to perceive sound waves as visible phenomena, studied him with intensity that made his skin prickle. Her upper manipulator appendages moved in slow patterns, the gestural language the Virani had developed since the silence began. She extended one appendage toward him, palm downward in the Virani gesture of formal request. Kyle stepped forward, closing the distance to half a meter. Miraveth's throat sac contracted, released. A sound emerged, fractured, layered with static, but recognizably language. You have traveled far. We are diminished by our need for you. The shame in her voice settled in his stomach like cold stone. I'm here to help, he said, immediately feeling the inadequacy of the phrase. The Meridian Temple complex revealed itself in stages, as Miraveth led him through corridors designed for purposes his human senses couldn't fully comprehend. Crystalline walls rose 30 meters overhead, their surfaces etched with patterns that would have sung in the presence of sound. Kyle's quarters occupied a small chamber in the outer ring. A window opened onto one of the temple's internal gardens, where bioluminescent flora pulsed in rhythms he couldn't fully perceive. He unpacked with mechanical precision, clothes in storage units, the book of poetry on the small table beside his sleeping platform, where it would remain unread as it had for 5 years. Morning arrived, as gradual brightening of bioluminescent panels. Kyle found his way to the communal eating area. Other songkeepers occupied the space, 12 of them, all maintaining careful distance from one another. They turned as he entered. 12 pairs of eyes adapted to perceive sound waves. 12 throat sacs pulsing with unvoiced melodies. The desperation in their collective gaze felt like physical contact. Miraveth rose from her position near the window. Come. The preservation chambers await. The work began simply. Kyle stood in the center of a crystalline room, while songkeepers took turns approaching, stopping at the prescribed distance, speaking their names, their histories, the songs they carried. His proximity enabled their voices, fractured, distorted, but functional. By the 3rd hour, Kyle understood that his body had become infrastructure. By the 9th, exhaustion settled into his bones in ways that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Miraveth called the session to end. The other songkeepers dispersed slowly, reluctantly, their gazes lingering on him with need that felt increasingly difficult to bear. You performed adequately, Miraveth said, her voice rougher now from sustained use. Tomorrow will be longer. She moved toward the exit, but her gait held a tremor. Kyle watched her steady herself against the crystalline wall. Are you? He began. I am functional, she said, not turning. Rest. But she didn't move. Her hand remained against the wall, Clawed fingers spread wide, her breathing audible in the chamber's silence. Kyle stepped closer, closer than protocol strictly allowed, and her throat sac pulsed once. "Thank you," she said, so quietly the words barely formed. Then she straightened and walked from the chamber with dignity that must have cost her everything. The temple developed patterns around Kyle's presence with organic inevitability. Songkeepers learned his schedule through observation, positioning themselves along his walking routes, in the dining area during meal periods, near the gardens during rest intervals. They never demanded, never approached closer than protocol allowed, but their need expressed itself in proximity and waiting. The archive transfer consumed 12 hours daily. Kyle stood in the largest preservation chamber, while songkeepers rotated through in carefully scheduled intervals. Miravethi orchestrated the sessions with unwavering precision, her fractured voice cutting through static to correct pronunciation, cadence, harmonic layering. During a particularly complex transmission, the songkeeper stumbled and steadied himself with one hand against Kyle's shoulder. The contact lasted 3 seconds. The keeper pulled away immediately, his scales flushing dark, and fled the chamber. Miravethi watched him go. "He has violated protocol. This will be noted." "It was an accident," Kyle said. "Irrelevant." She moved closer, precisely 1.5 meters. "You must maintain boundaries. They will take what you give. It is our nature, when diminished, to consume what sustains us." That evening, Kyle found himself in the temple gardens. Footsteps approached with the particular cadence of Virani movement. He didn't turn. He'd learned to distinguish Miravethi's gait from the others. She stopped at exactly 1.8 meters. Her throat sac pulsed once, but she didn't speak. After a long moment, she moved closer, 1.5 meters. "The younger ones speak of you with reverence," she said. "They have begun to develop attachment beyond professional necessity. Should I change something?" "No. You perform your function correctly. It is not you who creates the problem. It is us. We are not designed for this kind of need. Silence is death by slow suffocation. You are heir to the drowning." Kyle turned to face her. In the garden's light, her scales held colors he hadn't seen in the preservation chambers. Deep blues shifting to purple, silver patterns catching bioluminescence like starlight on water. "And you?" he asked. Her throat sac pulsed rapidly. "I am 7 centuries practiced in discipline. I will not—" She stopped, her scales flickering through dark colors. "I contain myself." But her hand trembled against her side, clawed fingers curling and uncurling in a gesture that looked like fighting the urge to reach forward. Kale stood slowly. He stepped forward, closing the gap to 0.5 meter. Miravethi's breathing changed, became audible. "What are you doing?" "Giving you permission, whatever you need. I'm here." For a long moment she remained absolutely still. Then her hand rose slowly, extending toward him in the Virani gesture of formal request. But there was nothing formal in the trembling of her appendage, the desperate edge to her breathing. Kyle closed the remaining distance. The private preservation chamber measured 3 meters across. Miravethi had requested it for the sacred songs, the ones meant to be transmitted keeper to keeper in absolute isolation. The door sealed behind him with a pressure hiss. Miravethi stood at the chamber's center, her scales dark with exertion before she'd even begun. The confined space forced proximity beyond anything the main chambers required. "These songs are the oldest in our keeping," she said. "They predate the confluence, predate our first ventures beyond this world. They are foundation. Without them, we are not Virani." She positioned herself precisely. Kyle stood where she indicated, close enough that her exhalations stirred the air against his skin. "You must remain still. These transmissions require absolute precision." Her throat sac began to pulse. The first notes emerged fractured, but carrying a depth that made the crystalline walls sing in response. The sound resonated directly in his bones, his chest cavity. The song lasted 17 minutes. At minute 16, she stumbled. Kyle caught her reflexively, his hands against her upper torso, feeling the rapid drum of her twin hearts through scale and muscle. Her face came within centimeters of his. Her throat sac pulsed against his forearm. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. They remained frozen, both breathing hard, her weight trusting him completely, while her scales flickered through colors. "I apologize," she said finally. "I have compromised protocol." You were falling. Yes. She straightened slowly, but didn't step back. The sacred songs require more than I have remaining. I am depleted. How many more songs? 7. 7 that must be transmitted before the cycle ends, before the rotation decree takes effect and you are reassigned. 16 days. 16 days to transmit 7 songs, each requiring this level of exertion. We'll complete them, he said. Her throat sac pulsed once, producing a sound like hollow laughter. Each builds upon the previous. Each requires deeper access, closer proximity. What we did today is the simplest of the 7. Her hands remained against his chest. How close? He asked. For the final song? Close enough that you will feel my twin hearts as if they beat in your own chest. Close enough that my breath will be your breath. Heat spread through Kyle's chest. Not arousal exactly, too alien for that, but awareness, acute and undeniable. The protocols, he began. The protocols were written by beings who have never experienced this level of need, who cannot comprehend what silence does to a species built on sound. She pulled away then, creating distance with visible effort. You should leave. Kyle didn't move. When is the next transmission? 2 days. I require recovery time. The chamber will be prepared at the hour of third sun descent. He left her there. His hands retained the impression of her body, the heat of her scales, the rhythm of her twin hearts. The second sacred song required 43 minutes and proximity measured in centimeters. Miravethi explained the parameters before they entered the chamber. The harmonic structure requires sympathetic resonance between my vocalization apparatus and your chest cavity. You will need to position yourself directly in front of me, close enough that your sternum contacts my primary resonance plate. The chamber door sealed behind them. Miravetha positioned herself at center. Here, face me. She extended her upper appendages, placing them on his shoulders, not for support but for alignment. Her claws pressed through his shirt. Closer. Kyle stepped forward until his chest touched the smooth plate at the center of her torso. The contact sent awareness spiking through his nervous system. Heat, pressure, the subtle shift of her breathing, the dual rhythm of her hearts now palpable against his ribs. Miravetha's scales darkened immediately. Her breathing changed, became rapid and shallow. The transmission will take 43 minutes. You must remain exactly as you are. Her throat sac began to pulse. The first notes traveled directly into his chest, resonating in his sternum, his ribs, the cavity around his heart. The sensation bypassed hearing, became tactile, became something felt rather than heard. By minute 7, sweat formed along his spine. His breathing synchronized with hers by necessity. Any variance disrupted the resonance. By minute 15, her claws had begun to dig into his shoulders, not deliberately, but reflexively as the exertion built. By minute 23, she was trembling. Kyle felt it through every point of contact. By minute 30, he understood why the protocols existed. Because standing here, his body serving as resonance chamber for her voice, felt like erasing the boundary between separate organisms. At minute 43, the song concluded. Miravetha's voice cut off abruptly, and she collapsed against him, her full weight trusting his support, her breathing labored. Kyle held her, his arms coming up automatically, feeling the frantic rhythm of her twin hearts. Her head rested against his shoulder, her breath hot against his neck. Minutes passed. 3, 5, 7. Neither moved. Finally, Miravetha's breathing slowed, steadied. Her claws retracted from his shoulders. She straightened with visible effort, creating centimeters of distance, though her hands remained on his shoulders. That was adequate. The transmission was successful. You collapsed. A predictable consequence. Recovery will require 48 hours. Kyle felt the loss of her weight against him. Are the remaining songs all this intense? The third song requires 59 minutes. The fourth 72, the intensity increases proportionally. And the seventh? She released him then, stepping back. The seventh song is called The Resonance of Origin. Transmitted correctly, it lasts 147 minutes, nearly 2.5 hours. How close? He asked. Her eyes held his. Close enough that you will understand why the ancient keepers believed this song could only be transmitted between bonded pairs. Close enough that we will both be changed by it. The chamber felt suddenly smaller. Kyle became aware of his own breathing, his pulse, the places on his shoulders where her claws had pressed deep enough to leave marks. The confluence decree, the rotation in 14 days. We will complete the transmissions before your reassignment. We must. These songs are foundation. Without them preserved, we lose not just knowledge but identity. She stopped at the doorway, not turning. The third session in 48 hours. Prepare yourself. Each transmission will demand more than the last. More proximity, more trust, more surrender of the boundaries that separate you from me. The temple settled into new rhythms. Songkeepers timed their archive sessions with precision, bordering on desperation. Thavaris, the scholar whose accidental contact had prompted Miravetha's warning, began leaving small offerings outside Kale's quarters, crystalline fragments that hummed when touched. The third sacred song required 59 minutes and proximity that erased any pretense of professional distance. His sternum against her chest plate, his arms around her torso for stabilization, her upper appendages gripping his shoulders. She'd trembled against him for the final 20 minutes, her scales darkening to near black, her breathing ragged. When the song concluded, she'd remained against him for long minutes, neither speaking, both breathing hard. 5 songs remaining, she'd said finally, each more demanding than the last. Recovery time lengthened after each transmission. A message arrived from the Confluence Council. Updated Decree 7 to Alpha 5. Prohibition of extended private sessions exceeding 30 minutes. Mandatory counseling for both humans and host populations showing signs of inappropriate attachment. Kyle read the decree twice, feeling cold spread through his chest. The sacred songs averaged 90+ minutes, required contact that regulations would classify as violation. He found her in the archive chamber. She saw his expression and dismissed the others. "You have received the updated decree," she said. "Not a question. It prohibits everything the sacred songs require. Yes, the Confluence monitors integration outcomes across all affected worlds. They have observed patterns developing, humans becoming essential in ways that extend beyond functional necessity. So they are preventing completion of the sacred transmissions. They are preventing what they perceive as dangerous attachment." Her throat sac pulsed rapidly. "They do not understand that some attachments are not pathology but survival." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that you have a choice. You can comply with the updated decree, maintain appropriate boundaries, accept rotation in 9 days. Or, her scales flickered through complex colors, or you can recognize that the sacred songs exist outside Confluence jurisdiction. You can choose to finish what we began, regardless of protocol, regardless of consequences. 9 days until rotation. 4 sacred songs remaining. The 4th song, he said. "When?" Something in her posture relaxed. "Tomorrow. I have recovered sufficiently." Duration? 72 minutes, and it requires ventral contact. The harmonic structure resonates through the softer tissue of your ventral torso. You will need to remove your upper clothing. I will need to position myself against your exposed skin. Heat spread through Kale's chest, his stomach lower. "I understand," he said. Her throat sac pulsed rapidly. Her hand rose, extending toward him, simply reaching. Kyle closed the distance between them. The 4th sacred song began with Kale removing his shirt, while Miravetha watched, her scales flickering through colors rapidly, deep blue to purple to near black. "Position yourself, arms at your sides, sternum level with my primary resonance plate." She stopped when her chest plate pressed against his sternum. The contact of her scales against his skin sent sensations spiking through his nervous system, warmth, subtle texture variations, the vibration of her twin hearts directly perceptible. "Your arms. You will need to stabilize me, around my torso, hands against my back plates." Kyle's arms encircled her body, his palms pressing against her back, feeling the trembling already beginning. 72 minutes. No variance in position. I must focus entirely on the transmission. I will not be able to maintain awareness of appropriate boundaries. You must maintain them for both of us. "I understand." Her throat sac began to pulse. The first notes resonated directly through his exposed chest, through his ribs, into his lungs. By minute 24, she'd begun to tremble visibly. Kale tightened his arms around her, providing stability. By minute 36, Her head had dropped forward against his shoulder, her breathing hot and ragged against his neck. By minute 48, Kyle understood viscerally why the ancient keepers had believed this song could only be transmitted between bonded pairs. By minute 60, Miravetha had stopped trying to maintain any pretense of control. Her claws had fully extended, pressing into his shoulders, with enough force to draw blood. Her lower appendages had given out entirely, her full weight supported by his arms. At minute 72, the song concluded. Miravetha collapsed completely, her body going limp, producing sounds that weren't words, broken, desperate, raw. Kyle held her, lowering them both to the floor, his back against the wall, her body cradled against his chest. Her breathing came in ragged gasps. Her scales had darkened to absolute black. Her claws remained embedded in his shoulders. Minutes passed. 15, 20. At 30 minutes, she stirred. "You are bleeding," she said, her voice destroyed. "It's fine. I was not supposed to lose control. You told me to maintain boundaries. This was the boundary. You, safe. The transmission, complete." Her throat sac pulsed rapidly. Her hand came up slowly, touching his shoulder where her claws had penetrated, tracing the small wounds. "I have marked you. Yes. This is not what the protocols permit. The song required it. You knew it would. Knowing and experiencing are not equivalent." Her eyes met his. "There are 3 songs remaining, each more demanding, each requiring proximities that will further erode what little distance remains between us. The final song will require 147 minutes of contact more intimate than this, and I will lose control again, and you will permit it, and we will both be changed in ways that cannot be reversed. 9 days until rotation, 3 sacred songs remaining." "I should have refused the assignment," she said quietly. "Should have recognized that sustained proximity with a single individual would inevitably create attachment beyond professional necessity." Kyle covered her hand with his. "Should I request reassignment before the final 3 songs?" Miravetha's entire body tensed. For a long moment she didn't respond, then quietly, "No, you should not." "Why?" "Because I have already lost sufficient control to acknowledge that I need you specifically. Not human presence generally. You. Your breathing synchronized with mine. Your heartbeat that I perceive through vibrations in your chest. Your arms that support me when exertion strips away my ability to support myself." She pulled away then, creating real distance, standing with visible effort. "The 5th song in 72 hours, prepare yourself. It will demand more than tonight demanded, and the 6th more than the 5th, and the 7th will demand everything, and I will take it, and you will give it. And neither of us will emerge unchanged." Recovery time collapsed under necessity. The 5th sacred song required 91 minutes and proximity that made previous transmissions feel restrained. "Prone position, you supine, supporting my full weight. The harmonic structure resonates through the soft tissues of your abdomen. My chest plate positioned directly against your ventral torso." The transmission lasted 91 minutes. 91 minutes of her body pressed completely against his, her weight crushing breath from his lungs, her voice resonating through his abdomen in ways that felt like being unmade and reconstructed. She'd lost control at minute 47, lost it completely, her claws shredding the floor on either side of his head, her breathing turning to desperate gasps, her entire body convulsing while her voice poured through him. Kyle had held her through it, one arm around her torso, one hand cradling her head, whispering meaningless comfort. At 91 minutes, she'd collapsed completely, unconscious, her twin hearts beating irregularly. Kyle had waited 17 minutes before she'd stirred. She'd fled the chamber without speaking, had locked herself in her private quarters for 36 hours. Tavares approached him in the gardens. "She is consuming herself. The sacred songs were never meant to be transmitted in this compressed timeline." "We don't have lunar cycles," Kyle said. "You have 6 days until rotation. She has desperation that overrides wisdom, and you have attachment that clouds judgment, both of you. You're saying we should stop. I'm saying that completing the remaining transmissions will transform both of you in ways that cannot be predicted or reversed. The final 2 songs exist at the boundary of what Virani physiology can endure, but the songs will be preserved, perhaps, Or perhaps you should ask yourself whether you are completing these transmissions for cultural preservation or for other reasons. Kyle sat in the gardens thinking about the weight of Miravethi's body against his, the desperate sounds she'd made, the way her twin hearts had felt beating irregularly against his ribs. She found him 3 hours later. The 6th transmission tomorrow I have sufficiently recovered. Thavaris says we're pushing too hard. Thavaris is correct. The 6th song requires 112 minutes. The 7th, 147. Attempting them separated by minimal recovery, while my vocal apparatus remains damaged from previous transmissions, carries significant risk. What kind of risk? Permanent impairment of vocalization capacity, neurological damage, physical collapse, her throat sac pulsed, or successful completion of the oldest songs in Vareni memory, preserved despite the silence. She stepped closer. 1 meter. I will ask you once clearly, do you wish to discontinue the sacred transmissions? Kyle looked at her, scales showing strain, throat sac moving with labored breathing, entire body trembling with exhaustion. No, he said. We finish it. Something in her posture relaxed, collapsed, reformed around relief so profound her scales flickered uncontrollably. Then tomorrow, 112 minutes, proximity more intimate than the 5th transmission, and you will need to maintain consciousness throughout. The 6th song requires your active participation. Requires you to consciously synchronize not just breathing and heartbeat, but intention, presence, awareness. Heat spread through his chest, his stomach, lower. I understand. Do you? She moved closer, 1/2 meter. I have lost control during every transmission since the 3rd song. Tomorrow I will lose it more completely. Will take from you things I should not take. Will demand things I should not demand. Will cross boundaries that should remain inviolate regardless of necessity. Her hand came to rest against his chest, directly over his heart. Her claws pressed lightly against his skin, not breaking it. Not yet. Tomorrow. Prepare yourself for the dissolution of whatever distance you believe still exists between us. The 6th sacred song began with Miraveith explaining the configuration in a voice already destroyed. Face-to-face positioning. Your back against the chamber wall. My body positioned straddling your lap. Maximum ventral contact. Your arms supporting my torso, my upper appendages around your neck. Kyle sat with his back against the wall, shirtless, watching Miravethi approach with movements that showed visible trembling. This positioning is used by bonded Vareni pairs during... She stopped. It carries significance beyond functional requirement. I am asking you to permit intimacy that my species reserves for committed partnership. I understand. Do you? Once I am positioned as the song requires, once the transmission begins, I will have no capacity to maintain appropriate boundaries. You will need to accept whatever I do, whatever I take. I'm giving you permission. Something in her control fractured. She moved forward, positioning herself over his lap, lowering her body until her weight settled against his thighs, her ventral surface pressing against his torso. The contact sent sensations spiking through every nerve, heat, pressure, the rapid flutter of her twin hearts directly perceptible, the trembling running through her muscles. Her upper appendages came around his neck, your arms, around my torso, hands against my back plates. Sufficient pressure to prevent separation when I lose control. Kyle's arms encircled her body, feeling the trembling intensify. 112 minutes. Do not release me, regardless of what occurs. Her throat sac began to pulse. The first notes resonated through his sternum, but different from previous transmissions. This required something from him, some quality of attention, of conscious participation. By minute 8, Kyle understood. The song required him to meet her voice with awareness, to synchronize not just breathing but intention, to consciously open himself to the intimacy they were creating. By minute 17, her claws had begun to dig into his shoulders. Her weight had shifted forward, pressing her body more firmly against his torso. By minute 34, she'd started to tremble violently. Kyle tightened his arms around her, supporting her weight completely. By minute 56, she'd lost all pretense of control. Her claws had fully extended, penetrating his shoulders. Her breathing had turned to gasps against his neck, her body convulsed in his arms. By minute 78, Kyle realized he was crying. silent tears running down his face while he held her, while her body broke apart in his arms. By minute 93, Miravetha had stopped trying to maintain any separation. Her body had molded completely against his. Her claws had penetrated deep enough to scrape bone. Her breathing had synchronized with his so completely that each inhalation felt shared. At minute 112, the song concluded. Miravetha collapsed completely, her body going utterly limp, producing sounds beyond any emotion he could name. Kale held her, feeling her twin hearts beating frantically irregular, feeling her breathing ragged against his neck, feeling her claws still embedded in his shoulders. He was still crying. Minutes passed, 45 minutes before she stirred. Her breathing changed, steadied. Her scales gradually lightened. Her claws began to retract. She went rigid in his arms, her entire body tensing with awareness of their position. But she didn't pull away. Her arms remained around his neck, her body pressed against his. "I took too much," she whispered. "No, you took what the song required. The song required functional resonance. What I took was not merely functional." Her hand moved to his chest over his heart. "I can perceive your heartbeat as if it exists in my own chest. I can feel your breathing as if my lungs expand with yours. I have entangled myself with you in ways that transcend species, transcend protocol, transcend every boundary that should have protected us both." The seventh song, 147 minutes, 4 days from now. Yes, 147 minutes that will demand everything the sixth song demanded and more. That will require intimacy more profound than this. That will complete our entanglement in ways that cannot be reversed. That will transform dependency into something the confluence has no words to describe, because they never anticipated this degree of necessary intimacy, creating actual... She stopped. Creating what? Her throat sac pulsed rapidly. Creating bond. The kind my species forms once in 7 centuries, if at all. The kind that exists independent of logic, transcends species barriers, makes the concept of separation feel like death by slow suffocation. Her hand pressed firmly against his chest. 4 days until the final transmission, 3 days until rotation, and I have already lost the capacity to imagine releasing you. "I don't want to be released," he said quietly. Her scales flickered through colors approaching black. She pulled away then, creating actual distance, standing with visible effort. 4 days. Prepare yourself for the final threshold. Prepare yourself for transformation that cannot be undone. The temple changed in the 3 days following the 6th transmission. Songkeepers moved through corridors with awareness that time had compressed to its final hours. Thavaris found him in the archives. She has not emerged from her quarters in 47 hours. She refuses medical attention. The final transmission is scheduled for tomorrow, and her condition is inadequate for the demands it will place on her. What are you saying? I am saying that attempting the resonance of origin in her current state carries significant probability of permanent damage. I am saying that bonded Virini cannot survive extended separation from their chosen partners. The neurological integration, the harmonic synchronization, the dependency becomes physiological. Separation induces systemic failure. For bonded pairs, distance is death by degrees. The word settled like ice. She's not bonded. The 6th transmission was intense, but the 6th transmission sustained 112 minutes of the most intimate harmonic resonance our species can achieve. The configuration you employed is reserved for bonded pairs specifically because it creates neurological pathways that resist dissolution. The 7th transmission lasts 147 minutes, in a configuration more intimate still. If you complete it, if you create that degree of entanglement and then accept rotation 3 days later, you will be condemning her to slow neurological deterioration. Why didn't she tell me? Perhaps she believed you would refuse if you understood the cost. Perhaps she values cultural preservation above personal survival. Kyle found her quarters as the triple suns set. The door remained sealed. He stood outside, hand raised to activate the entry request. The door opened before he could decide. Miravetha stood in the entrance, her scales showing strain that 47 hours of isolation hadn't hidden. "You should not be here," she said. "Thavaris told me about bonding neurological effects, about what happens if bonded pairs separate." Something in her control fractured. Then you understand why tomorrow's transmission cannot occur. Why you should accept rotation in 3 days. Or I could refuse rotation. Her entire body went rigid. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then, quietly, you would sacrifice your rotation bonus, your debt forgiveness, your return to Earth, your entire future among your own species, for what? Yes. The word hung between them. Her throat sac pulsed frantically, producing sounds she couldn't suppress, broken, desperate, layered with disbelief and need and hope. You do not comprehend what you are offering. Refusing rotation means permanent assignment, means remaining on this world until the silence ends or you die. Means accepting that your proximity has become essential, not just to cultural preservation, but to my continued neurological function. Means choosing entanglement that will define the rest of your existence. Kyle stepped forward, closing the distance until he stood close enough to feel the heat radiating from her scales. I'm choosing you, specifically. Not function, not duty. You, entangled with me in ways that transcend species and protocol. You, whose twin hearts I can feel beating. You, whose voice resonates in my chest like it belongs there. You, who I cannot imagine releasing. Her claws rose slowly, trembling, extending toward him. Kyle closed the remaining distance, his arms coming around her body as hers came around his neck. She collapsed against him. Tomorrow, the final transmission. 147 minutes that will complete the bond we've been forming since the first sacred song. 147 minutes that will make separation physiologically catastrophic for both of us. Kyle tightened his arms around her. Then after tomorrow we don't separate. Her claws pressed against his shoulders. After tomorrow, we will be permanently entangled. You will be bound to this world, to me, to a culture that will consume your entire existence. You will lose Earth, lose your own species, lose every alternative future you might have chosen. I know I'm choosing it anyway. Why? Because 3 weeks ago I was infrastructure, functional, essential but generic. And now I'm yours, specifically, in ways that feel more real than anything I left behind. Because your voice resonates in my chest like it's teaching my heart a new language. Because holding you while you break apart during transmissions feels like the most important thing I've ever done. Because choosing you feels like finally choosing something that matters. Her throat sac pulsed rapidly. Her claws traced the scars on his shoulders. Tomorrow, 147 minutes, the resonance of origin. The configuration will require intimacy more profound than anything we've sustained. Will require you to open yourself completely, to accept whatever I demand, to give me access to your body and mind and essence in ways that will complete the neurological pathways bonding creates. After tomorrow, separating us will require severing connections that span physiological, psychological, and spiritual dimensions. I understand. Do you? Once we complete the final transmission, once the bond is fully formed, you will perceive the world differently. We'll begin to sense harmonic structures your species typically cannot detect. We'll feel my emotional states through neurological connections that transcend distance. Will be mine in ways that make the concept of individual identity feel incomplete without me. Her hand pressed against his chest. Is that what you want? Permanent entanglement that erases the boundary between us? Yes, that's exactly what I want. Her scales flickered through colors approaching black. Then tomorrow we complete what we began. Tomorrow we cross the final threshold. Tomorrow we become permanently bonded, regardless of protocol, regardless of confluence regulations, regardless of every rational limitation that should have prevented this degree of entanglement between our species. She pressed closer. Stay with me tonight, not for transmission, not for function, just stay. Let me feel your heartbeat, while I still possess the capacity to choose this consciously. Tomorrow will strip away choice, will create dependencies that operate independent of will. Tonight I want to choose you deliberately. I'm staying. They moved into her quarters together. They lay down, her body against his, her head resting on his chest, her breathing synchronizing with his in the darkness. No transmission, no functional necessity, just two beings choosing proximity while choice remained possible. Kyle held her through the night, feeling her twin hearts beating against his ribs, feeling the weight of tomorrow settling like transformation in his chest. 1 transmission remaining. 2 days until rotation that would never occur. Everything changing. He pressed his lips against her head and chose consciously what tomorrow would make inevitable. Morning arrived as gradual brightening. Kyle woke with Miraveth still pressed against him, her breathing synchronized with his. "Today," she said quietly. 147 minutes. Everything changes. They moved through morning routines in weighted silence. The younger songkeepers watched them walk through corridors toward the small preservation chamber, the chamber door sealed behind them. Miravetha turned to face him. "The resonance of origin requires configuration more intimate than the 6th song, requires that you support my full weight in prone position, that your entire ventral surface contacts mine, that we synchronize breathing, heartbeat, intention so completely that distinguishing between us becomes genuinely difficult." She moved closer. "The transmission will last 147 minutes. I will lose control within the first 30, will demand from you things that protocol exists specifically to prevent. Will take from you access to your body and mind and essence in ways that complete the neurological pathways bonding creates. After today, separating us will cause systemic failure in both our physiologies." Kyle removed his shirt slowly. "I'm ready. This is the final moment you possess genuine choice. Once the transmission begins, once we achieve the degree of harmonic resonance this song requires, neurological changes will occur that cannot be reversed. You will become mine. I will become yours." Her clawed hand rose, pressing against his chest over his heart. "I am asking you one final time. Is this what you want?" "Yes. This is exactly what I want." She stepped back, gestured toward the chamber floor. "Then lie down. Supine. Arms at your sides, initially. I will position myself against you, and we will become what we have been forming since the first sacred song." Kyle lowered himself to the floor. Miravetha approached slowly, her movements trembling. She positioned herself over him, lowering her body with deliberate precision until her full weight settled against his torso, her ventral surface aligned with his, her chest plate pressing against his sternum, her face close enough that he could see his reflection in her eyes. The contact sent sensation flooding through every nerve, heat, pressure, the rapid flutter of her twin hearts directly perceptible. Every point where their bodies touched carrying awareness so acute it felt like being unmade. "Your arms, around my torso. Maximum contact. We must be as close as 2 separate organisms can achieve while remaining nominally distinct." Kyle's arms came around her body, pulling her more firmly against him until no space remained between their bodies. Her claws came to rest on his shoulders. 147 minutes. Do not release me. Do not retreat mentally. Remain absolutely present for every second. The bond requires your conscious participation, your deliberate choice to open yourself completely. Her throat sac began to pulse. The first notes emerged fractured, carrying harmonics that resonated through his sternum, his ribs, his lungs, his heart. But different from every previous transmission, this required not just passive reception, but active engagement. By minute 12, Kyle felt the first changes in his perception. The chamber's crystalline walls began to shimmer with patterns he'd never seen before, harmonic structures that his human eyes shouldn't have been able to perceive. By minute 28, he could feel her emotional state through the points where their bodies touched, could perceive her fear and need and determination flowing into him through skin and scale contact. By minute 39, Miraveth lost control entirely. Her claws extended fully, penetrating his shoulders with force that sent pain spiking, but pain that felt distant, secondary to the overwhelming intimacy. By minute 57, Kyle understood what she'd meant by merger, could feel her twin hearts as if they beat in his own chest, could sense the strain in her vocal apparatus as if his throat was producing the sounds. By minute 73, he couldn't tell where his breathing ended and hers began. Couldn't distinguish between his heartbeat and the dual rhythm hammering against his ribs. By minute 91, he was crying again. Could feel her crying too through the neurological pathways forming between them. Could sense her terror and relief and love. Could perceive that she was experiencing his emotions as he experienced hers. By minute 112 words had lost meaning. Everything was sensation, resonance, the merger of two nervous systems learning to function as integrated whole. By minute 134, he understood why the ancient keepers had called this the resonance of origin, because it felt like returning to some primordial state before organisms had separated into distinct entities. At minute 147, the song concluded with harmonic sequence that felt like the universe splitting open. Kale's vision went white, then dark, then exploded into perception of frequencies and patterns that human eyes weren't designed to see. Miraveta collapsed completely, but he could still feel her through the pathways they'd created. They lay together on the chamber floor, both unconscious, both breathing in perfect synchronization, their hearts beating in rhythm that would never fully separate again. When consciousness returned, slowly, gradually, awareness filtering back through pathways that had been fundamentally rewired, neither could determine who woke first, because waking felt simultaneous. Kyle opened his eyes, feeling Miraveta do the same through connections that made the boundary between their consciousness feel permeable. She remained pressed against him, her breathing synchronized with his, her twin hearts beating in rhythm with his single heart. "It is complete," she whispered. But Kale heard the words through multiple channels, through his ears, through the vibrations in her chest, through the neurological pathways that transmitted her intention directly to his awareness. He tightened his arms around her, feeling her emotional state flooding through him, exhaustion, relief, love, fear of what they'd become, joy at having become it together. "I can feel you, not just physically. I can feel your thoughts, your emotions. Yes, we are bonded, permanently neurologically. What you feel as my thoughts are harmonic patterns transmitted through pathways we created during the resonance. What I perceive as your emotions are bioelectric signatures your body produces that I can now sense directly. We are no longer entirely separate." She pulled back slightly, just enough to meet his eyes, and Kyle saw the world through her vision simultaneously with his own, saw himself through her perception. "The confluence will not approve. We'll classify this as violation of integration protocols. We'll attempt separation, reassignment, psychological intervention to sever the pathways we have created." Kyle felt cold spread through his chest, felt it simultaneously in his own nervous system and through their bond. "They can try. I'm refusing rotation, requesting permanent assignment. They will deny it. We'll cite regulations designed to prevent exactly this outcome. We'll argue that your entanglement with me constitutes psychological impairment. We'll separate us regardless of what we want." Through their bond, Kyle felt her terror at that possibility, felt the visceral awareness that separation would cause systemic failure, that the pathways they'd created required proximity to maintain function. Then we don't let them. We present this as successful cultural preservation, 7 sacred songs transmitted completely. Function fulfilled exactly as integration protocols intended. And the bond? We don't explain it. We demonstrate that separation would kill us both, make it their problem to solve, rather than ours to justify. Through their bond, he felt her desperate hope warring with her fear. 3 days until scheduled rotation. We have 3 days to convince the confluence that what we have become matters more than the protocols we violated to become it. Kyle pulled her closer, feeling their hearts beating in rhythm that would never fully separate. "Then we start now, together." Outside the chamber, the temple waited. The younger songkeepers waited. The confluence regulations waited. But inside this small room, 2 beings from different species had created something new, something that transcended every limitation that should have made it impossible. They remained together on the chamber floor, neither ready to separate, both understanding that whatever came next, they would face it as bonded pair, permanently entangled, choosing each other over protocol, over regulation, over every rational limitation that suggested they should remain apart. The resonance of origin had completed. They had become what they were always forming since the first sacred song, and nothing would separate them without destroying them both. The temple's medical facility hummed with diagnostic equipment. The Varis supervised the scans with scales showing deep concern. "Neurological integration unprecedented in cross-species bonding literature," he said. "Harmonic pathway formation, showing persistence independent of proximity. Separation beyond 3 meters induces measurable distress in both physiologies. This is either evolutionary marvel or catastrophic system failure, possibly both. Kyle sat on the examination platform with Miravetha pressed against his side, their hands clasped, both feeling the diagnostic equipment's intrusion through their bond as shared discomfort. "How far can we separate before physiological distress becomes dangerous?" Kyle asked. Tavares examined the readouts. Current data suggests approximately 10 meters before bioelectric feedback loops begin destabilizing. Beyond that, you begin experiencing each other's distress in amplifying spirals that could theoretically escalate to neurological damage. "How long until the confluence responds to our integration report?" "Estimate 36 hours until official response arrives. You understand they will not approve what you have done. We'll classify it as severe protocol violation. We'll mandate immediate separation regardless of physiological consequences." "Then we have 36 hours to make separation impossible," Kyle said, feeling his determination transmit through their bond. The younger songkeepers had gathered outside the medical facility, their eyes tracking Kyle and Miravetha through the transparent walls. They understood what the bond represented, proof that cross-species connection could transcend regulations. Kyle and Miravetha spent the 36 hours in deliberate visibility, moving through the temple together, demonstrating the bond's depth through every synchronized movement, every shared glance, every moment of distress when forced separation exceeded comfortable distance. The official confluence response arrived exactly 36 hours after their integration report submission. Tavares received it with darkening scales. "They deny your request for permanent assignment. Cite violation of updated Decree 7 Alpha 5. They mandate your immediate return to confluence integration processing for psychological evaluation and bond severance intervention." "Bond severance," Miravetha repeated. Through their connection, Kyle felt her terror spiking. "They cannot actually sever it," Tavares said. "The neurological integration you have achieved operates at fundamental level. Attempting disruption would likely cause catastrophic failure in both nervous systems. But they will try." He moved closer. "I must ask, was it worth it? The 7 sacred songs are preserved, yes. Cultural heritage maintained. But at cost of your freedom, your autonomy, your ability to exist as independent beings." Kyle felt the question resonate through their bond, felt Miravetha's response emerging simultaneously with his own. "Yes," they said together. It was worth it. Through their bond, Kyle felt Miravetha's love amplifying his own, felt the recognition that what they'd become together mattered more than any alternative future they'd sacrificed. "Then you will need strategy more sophisticated than simply refusing compliance," Tavares said. "Unless you make your case not as violation, but as scientific discovery. Present your bond as evidence of previously undocumented cross-species neurological integration capability. Argue for study rather than severance." Hope flickered through their bond. Would they accept that argument? Academic Council has authority to override integration protocol administration in cases of significant scientific interest. If we present compelling evidence that your bond represents novel neurological phenomenon with broader implications for cross-species cooperation, we might convince them that preservation serves confluence interests better than severance. He activated a holographic display. "We have 30 hours before the transport arrives. We use that time to build irrefutable scientific case that you are not protocol violators, but evolutionary development that merits protection." The younger songkeepers mobilized with desperate efficiency, compiling documentation, recording observations, building comprehensive analysis of the bond's formation, structure, and function. During one session, forced to separate by 15 meters for measurement purposes, Kyle felt the bond's distress spike through him like physical injury, felt Miravetha's panic amplifying his own, creating spiral that made his vision blur, made his heart race irregularly. The younger keepers terminated the separation after 90 seconds, both subjects showing dangerous physiological instability. "This supports our argument," Tavares said, "demonstrates that separation is not merely uncomfortable, but genuinely dangerous." 20 hours before transport arrival, they transmitted their comprehensive analysis to the Academic Council, bypassing integration protocol administration entirely. arguing that the bond represented unprecedented cross-species neurological integration, that forced severance would constitute destruction of unique scientific phenomenon. That study and preservation served confluence interests better than punishment and separation. 15 hours before transport arrival, they received Academic Council's preliminary response. Case presents sufficient scientific interest to warrant temporary stay of rotation, pending detailed evaluation. Integration Protocol Administration overruled. Kyle Reese granted provisional permanent assignment to Meridian Temple Complex for duration of bond study. Miraveth's relief flooded through their bond with intensity that made Kale's vision blur with tears. They collapsed together on the archive chamber floor, holding each other while younger keepers celebrated around them. Temporary stay, Miravetha said quietly, not permanent approval. They will study us, evaluate us, determine if our bond merits preservation or represents dangerous precedent to be eliminated. Then we convince them it merits preservation, Kyle said, tightening his arms around her. Through their connection, he felt her fear warring with determination, felt her love amplifying his own resolve. The transport arrived on schedule, but carried Academic Council observers rather than integration protocol enforcers. Scientists from 7 different species, all specializing in neurological phenomena, all fascinated by what Kale and Miraveth represented. The observation period began. Daily scans, constant monitoring, documentation of every shared perception, every synchronized movement, invasive and exhausting but necessary to build case that what they'd become mattered more than the protocols they'd violated. Through it all, they remained together, sleeping in synchronized rhythm, moving through the temple in unconscious coordination, demonstrating that the bond wasn't impairment, but evolution. 3 months of observation compressed Kale and Miravetha's existence into data streams and holographic presentations. The Academic Council convened in the temple's largest chamber, 17 species represented, all focused on determining whether the bond merited preservation or elimination. Kyle stood before them with Miravetha at his side, their hands clasped, their breathing synchronized. Through their bond, they shared the weight of scrutiny, the fear of separation, the desperate hope that 17 beings would recognize what they'd become as worth preserving. The Council's lead researcher presented findings with scientific precision. Neurological integration shows unprecedented cross-species pathway formation. Bioelectric synchronization creates feedback loops that amplify emotional states while stabilizing both physiologies. Separation beyond 10 meters induces measurable distress. Separation beyond 50 meters for extended duration carries high probability of permanent neurological damage in both subjects. Another researcher added context. This represents first documented case of successful bonding between species with incompatible reproductive biology, non-overlapping sensory ranges, and divergent neurological architectures. The achievement suggests cross-species intimacy potential far exceeding current theoretical frameworks. Through their bond, Kyle felt Miravetha's hope spiking, felt her fear that hope would be crushed. The deliberation lasted 7 hours. Kale and Miravetha remained standing throughout, their bodies naturally seeking contact that stabilized the feedback loops. Finally, the Council reached consensus. The lead researcher flickered with patterns that translated as formal pronouncement. Academic Council finds that the bond between Kale Reese and Miraveth represents scientifically significant phenomenon meriting preservation and continued study. However, the circumstances of the bond's formation violated multiple integration protocols. We cannot approve the means while celebrating the result without creating precedent that undermines essential safeguards. Cold spread through Kyle's chest. "What are you saying?" the Verini elder responded. "We are saying that your bond will be preserved. You will be granted permanent cohabitation approval. Standard rotation protocols suspended indefinitely. However, the protocols you violated will be strengthened rather than relaxed. Future integration assignments will carry additional restrictions specifically designed to prevent bond formation. Your uniqueness will be protected by ensuring it remains unique." Through their bond, Kale felt the relief and betrayal braiding together. They were safe, permanently approved, would not be separated, but the pathway they'd followed to reach each other would be closed to everyone who came after. "You are making us the exception that proves the rule," Miraveth said quietly, "preserving us while preventing anyone else from becoming what we became." "Yes. We cannot risk widespread bond formation between human integrators and host populations. The dependency you have demonstrated, while scientifically fascinating, represents systemic vulnerability the confluence cannot accept at scale. You will be studied, documented, preserved as unique case, but the protocols that permitted your formation will be eliminated." The younger Songkeeper's colors showed distress at the pronouncement. They had watched Kyle and Miraveth's bond formation with hope that profound connection might be achievable. Now that hope was being systematically dismantled. "Is that acceptable to you?" the lead researcher asked. "Permanent approval for your bond in exchange for ensuring no others can follow your pathway?" Kyle felt the question's weight through their connection, felt Miraveth's conflict amplifying his own. They could refuse, could argue for broader approval, but refusal would likely result in their bond being classified as dangerous precedent requiring elimination. Through their bond, they shared the recognition simultaneously. Their choice was between their own survival as bonded pair or abstract possibility of others achieving similar connection. "Yes," they said together. "That's acceptable." The Academic Council formalized their decision with documentation that would add restrictions to prevent future bond formation, that would preserve Kale and Miraveth, while ensuring they remained singular exception. The observers departed. The younger Songkeepers dispersed with colors showing complex emotions: joy for Kale and Miraveth's approval, grief for the future connections now prevented. Thavaris remained, his scales showing scholarly satisfaction, warring with personal concern. "You have achieved permanence, but permanence purchased by closing the door behind you. Every human integrator who follows will face restrictions designed to prevent them from becoming what you became. You are preserved at cost of ensuring your uniqueness." Through their bond, Kale felt Miraveth's guilt spiking. He pulled her closer, transmitting calm and conviction. "We chose survival," he said quietly. "We chose each other. Everything else was consequence of that choice, not its purpose." Her claws pressed against his shoulders. "I know. But knowing does not eliminate guilt." They remained in the chamber after Thavaris departed, feeling the bond pulsing between them with vitality that made questions of right and wrong feel secondary to the simple fact of their existence together. "What happens now?" Kyle asked. "Now we exist. We continue the archive work. We maintain the temple. We live as bonded pair in world that will study us, document us, preserve us as unique phenomenon that must never be replicated." Her scales flickered through colors that conveyed complex resignation. "We become what we feared becoming. Exception that proves the rule. Singular case that justifies preventing all others." Through their bond, Kyle felt her acceptance warring with regret, felt his own emotions mirroring hers. "Together," he said. "Together," she confirmed, her claws pressing into his shoulders with pressure that felt like possession and promise. The temple settled into silence around them, 7 sacred songs preserved, 2 beings permanently entangled, protocols strengthened to prevent anyone else from following their pathway to intimacy. They had become what regulations existed to prevent, and in becoming it, had ensured no others could follow. 5 years passed in rhythms that felt both eternal and instantaneous, time measured not by calendar, but by the deepening of pathways that had transformed 2 separate beings into something that existed primarily in the space between them. Kyle stood in the temple gardens during the quiet hour, watching bioluminescent flora pulse in patterns he now perceived as intended, harmonic structures visible through the neurological changes the bond had created. Miraveth's presence pressed against his awareness even across the garden's distance. The archive work continued. Songkeepers cycled through the main chambers, their fractured voices preserved through his proximity. But the work felt different now, less desperate, more sustainable, routine rather than crisis. New human integrators arrived periodically, assigned to other species, other temples. But they came under strengthened protocols, mandatory rotation every 6 months, prohibited private sessions longer than 20 minutes, constant psychological screening, immediate reassignment at first sign of attachment formation. Kyle watched them arrive and depart, saw the careful distance they maintained, understood that his bond with Miraveth served as cautionary tale rather than aspirational example. The guilt of that knowledge had diminished over time, worn smooth by years of choosing each other daily, by the undeniable reality that their bond functioned, sustained them both. Miraveth found him in the gardens, as triple suns set. She stopped beside him, her scales showing the deep blue he'd learned to associate with contentment, her breathing synchronizing with his automatically. The Academic Council requests updated documentation. They wish to examine how the bond has evolved. Through their connection, Kale felt her resignation at the ongoing scrutiny. When? Next lunar cycle. Comprehensive neurological mapping, behavioral observation, separation tolerance testing. We remain their favorite scientific curiosity. Does it bother you, being observed constantly, being the exception that justifies preventing all others? Her emotional response transmitted through their bond before words could form. Conflict, acceptance, guilt, love. Sometimes. But then I perceive you through our connection, feel your presence in my awareness, even when we occupy different chambers, sense your emotional state as if it were my own. She stopped, her scales flickering through colors that conveyed depth beyond language. And I recognize that whatever guilt I carry for closing the door behind us matters less than the simple fact of having found you on the other side. Through their bond, Kale felt her love amplifying his own, creating feedback that made individual attribution impossible. 5 years of sustained proximity had blurred the boundaries they'd still partially maintained after the final transmission. The younger ones ask about bonding. The newest human arrivals, before the restrictions, teach them not to hope for it. They see us and wonder if connection that deep is possible for them. What do you tell them? That it's forbidden, that protocols exist specifically to prevent what we achieved, that they should focus on their assigned functions rather than seeking intimacy that regulations prohibit. Through their bond, he felt his own guilt spiking, felt Miraveth sensing his distress, felt her comfort flowing back. But you wish you could tell them differently. Yes, I wish I could tell them that the bond is worth every cost we paid to achieve it, that intimacy this profound justifies violating every protocol, that finding someone whose heartbeat synchronizes with yours, whose emotional states you perceive as your own, whose consciousness overlaps with yours until individual identity feels incomplete, that finding that is worth more than compliance. He turned to face her, seeing the world simultaneously through his eyes and through her perception transmitted via their bond. But telling them that would be cruelty, because they can't achieve it under current restrictions, because we closed the door by walking through it. Her claws came to rest on his shoulders. We made the choice we could live with, chose our survival over abstract possibility of others' connections. It was selfish choice, but it was our choice, made together, through bond that already existed when we made it. Through their connection, Kyle felt her certainty, felt the recognition that their bond had been forming since the first sacred song. 5 years. Does it feel like forever yet? Her throat sac pulsed against his chest. Forever feels like insufficient duration. I perceive you in my awareness, and cannot imagine consciousness without your presence woven through it. Cannot comprehend existence as separate being rather than bonded pair. Cannot... She stopped, her breathing changing. Cannot imagine ever choosing differently. Even knowing the cost, even understanding the guilt, even recognizing that we are preserved by preventing others from achieving what we found. I cannot imagine choosing differently. Through their bond, Kyle felt the truth in her words resonating with his own certainty, felt their emotions amplifying each other until individual origin became impossible to determine. Then we accept it, accept being the exception, accept the guilt of closing doors, accept being studied as phenomenon while living as partners who chose each other over everything else. Her claws pressed into his shoulders, claiming him, being claimed in return. Together, together, Kale confirmed, feeling her twin hearts beating against his ribs, feeling the bond they'd created pulsing between them, feeling the weight of forever settling like purpose in his chest. The temple's bioluminescent panels cycled toward evening illumination, casting patterns that he perceived now as intended, harmonic structures made visible through neurological changes that had transformed him into something neither fully human nor something else but merged, bonded, permanently entangled. The younger songkeepers would continue their work, New human integrators would arrive under restrictions designed to prevent them from discovering what he'd found. The Academic Council would continue studying the bond as scientific curiosity, and Kyle and Miravetha would continue existing as exception that proved the rule, a singular case preserved by ensuring no others could follow. But in the gardens, in the quiet hour between work and rest, two beings stood together in configuration they'd maintained for 5 years, their breathing synchronized, their hearts beating in rhythm, their consciousness overlapping in ways that made questions of right and wrong feel secondary to simple fact of their existence together. They had chosen each other. That choice had costs, guilt, scrutiny, knowing they'd closed doors by walking through them. But it also had value that transcended cost, intimacy profound enough to rewrite biology, connection deep enough to merge consciousness, love strong enough to make separation feel like death. 5 years. Forever. The distinction felt arbitrary when measured against bond, that made time feel like it existed primarily to deepen pathways already formed. Kyle held Miravetha as triple moons rose, casting light through crystalline walls, in patterns that would have been symphonic if perceived correctly, patterns he now perceived exactly as intended through changes the bond had created. They had become what regulations existed to prevent. And in becoming it, had discovered that some transformations matter more than protocols designed to prevent them, that some intimacy justifies every boundary it violates, that some connections are worth preserving even at cost of ensuring they remain unique. Together they stood, bonded, permanent, exception and cautionary tale, phenomenon and partners, choosing each other daily for 5 years and continuing to choose, would continue choosing for whatever duration forever actually encompassed. The resonance of origin had completed 5 years ago, but its true completion was ongoing daily, measured in synchronized heartbeats and shared consciousness, and the simple fact of two beings permanently entangled, choosing each other over everything else, over guilt, over scrutiny, over the loneliness of existing as separate organisms. The temple settled into evening silence around them. They remained in the gardens, holding each other, breathing in rhythm, their bond pulsing between them. Forever had already begun, would continue, would deepen, would remain what it had always been since the first sacred song. Two beings becoming one entity that existed primarily in the space between them, choosing each other, permanent, bonded, transformed beyond reversal. Together, always together.